Halloween. Interesting, fun, spooky. Why does it exist? Why do we even do it? Why does it seem to be getting more popular over time? Join me today as I dive into the fascinating history of Halloween, unearthing the spooky origins behind maybe the world's most beloved holiday. As I bring in award-winning author and widely acknowledged world's leading authority on Halloween, Lisa Morton. I literally remember trick-or-treating till almost midnight, and people actually opened the doors and they didn't shoot you.
I like to call myself that weird little girl who wanted to be a monster instead of a princess every Halloween. Snap-apple was a version of bobbing for apples, which sounds absolutely terrifying and very dangerous to me with Snap-apple.
Welcome to High Strangeness, where we ask questions and explore all that is strange and unexpected in our reality.
Welcome to High Strangeness. I'm Tony, and this is the place where we talk about all things strange and/or unexpected in our reality. Halloween, probably my favorite holiday, seems to be getting bigger and bigger every year. But how long has it been around? How has it changed and evolved over time? Today, we're going to take a peek into some of that, the history, the information, and those things. And I'm excited because on the show today, I have someone who is widely acknowledged as one of the world's leading authorities on Halloween. And she's an award-winning author, and her name is Lisa Morton. Lisa, welcome to the show. Thank you. Thank you for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Tony. Thanks for inviting me onto the show.
You know, this is going to be great. I love this topic just in general. Always have. My kids know it. They love Halloween as well. Always used to decorate, do all kinds of crazy stuff, and they enjoy it. It's a great holiday to do things. So I wanted to ask you, before we get into anything, you're coming to us from California, is that correct?
Yes, I'm just north of Los Angeles.
Awesome. Now, were you able to keep away from all the crazy wildfires that happened a while back, last year, actually?
The wildfires were interesting. I actually was very briefly under an evacuation warning. There was one called the Hearst Fire that was just a couple of miles to the north of me because I'm a little bit up in the foothills. But thankfully, it was not one of the major ones, and we didn't have to evacuate, in fact. But yeah, it was a very strange time in LA.
Yeah, that's just terrible. I had a chance to interview and talk to somebody about the Lahaina, Hawaii fires, and it's just terrifying what everybody must go through when something like that happens. So I'm glad your property was spared, your lives and family and stuff like that, but scary, definitely scary. Hopefully none of that happens anytime soon again, right?
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about Halloween in California. Is it pretty big out there?
Oh, yes. It has always been pretty big here. I'm a native. I was born and raised here and have lived almost my entire life here. And when I was a kid, trick or treat was huge. My neighborhood, every house decorated, all the kids were out. It was fun because back then your parents did not go with you, which was
Yes.
very empowering for one night of the year, and it was really fun. And it is huge now. We, of course, have the West Hollywood Halloween Festival here, which draws hundreds of thousands of people every year. We have, of course, a lot of the amusement parks that kind of created the modern haunted attraction, Disneyland, Universal, Knott's Berry Farm. And yeah, it's a big thing here.
Yeah, I love it. And you mentioned some of the amusement parks. I know for us, my kids are all grown up, but now I've got some grandkids, and we almost always make it right around Halloween when we go because we want all of that, right? We want to experience all that at those parks at Disneyland and stuff. It's amazing. Trick or treating. You said it was great out there. Still doing good in California these days?
It has become a regionalized thing, just as it seems to have done all over the country. I mean, it is now the kind of thing where there are certain neighborhoods that go absolutely nuts for it, and people will drive to those neighborhoods from all over Southern California to take their kids trick or treating. And I get reports from friends all over the country that that has become very common all
Yeah.
over. And so that's something that's a little bit of an odd new development just within the last maybe 20 years or so.
I mean, it's amazing to me. We do have this. So I'm in Utah, and just outside of Salt Lake City, about 25 minutes south of it, and there's a community in the basin or in the valley here that is called Daybreak, and it is really beautiful homes, throwback homes from the. It's got styles from the East Coast, everywhere in the country, all in one community. They've done that on purpose, and in the middle of this community is a huge series of lakes, and then there's an island right in the middle. And that island goes crazy for Halloween. People come all over, park, take their wagons to pull their kids, and everybody just walks with hot chocolate up and down all of the streets. It's amazing. I love it.
Oh,
It's incredible. And
that's
it's
a
funny
very
to me.
particular regionalized celebration. I haven't heard of that
Yeah.
one before.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to try. Well, we'll see. I'm going to try and do some kind of episode on that this year. We'll see if I can do that. But yeah, it's so much fun, and it reminds me, just sharing a minute about my own experiences when I came to Utah, because I'm from the East Coast, and it was wonderful. As a young person, I literally remember trick or treating till almost midnight, and people actually opened the doors and they didn't shoot you. It was great. But I came here, and I remember the first year I was out here for college, and I had a little townhouse, and it was Halloween. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I had come home from work or school, and there were kids playing in the courtyard. And I was like, oh no, what are they doing? And I walked up to the kids and I said, hey, Halloween, what are you guys doing? And they go, yeah, we know it's Halloween. I go, well, aren't you going to go out for Halloween? They go, oh yeah, we go out after dinner when it's dark. And on the East Coast, they started pulling away from evening trick-or-treating right about then. So I was so excited to see this, and it is really special out here. In some ways, some of the communities reminds me of the E.T. movie, right? Where the kids are running all over. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, this is going to be probably a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I know you're an expert of Halloween, but are you a lover of Halloween?
I am. It was always my favorite holiday growing up. My mother was mad for Christmas, but it was always Halloween for me. I like to call myself that weird little girl who wanted to be a monster instead of a princess every Halloween. And I loved horror, I loved monsters, so it was a great holiday for me. And it's what's weird is that I kind of fell into being an expert on it by accident. That was nothing I ever had planned, and about 20 years ago, I was approached by a publisher I had worked with about doing another book with them. I'd done a film book with them, something completely not related to Halloween. And when they said, would you like to do another book? I looked at their current catalog of titles and I saw that they had done something called the Christmas Encyclopedia. So I
Mm.
gave them a proposal for something called the Halloween Encyclopedia. And if I had not loved the holiday before that, after spending a couple of years researching an encyclopedia, I certainly would have been addicted. And, now
Oh
I'm
yeah.
very happily obsessed with it.
Yeah, that's amazing to me. And it's funny, as I introduced you, very subtly, right? You've got an amazing history of things that you've done, and I just didn't read off of it. It's just so much. Share a little bit about some of the things you've done, because it's amazing and truly puts you in that place of expert for Halloween.
Yeah, I am. As a writer, I actually started wanting to be a screenwriter. That was what I studied in college, and it wasn't until I had a tiny bit of success in that area that I realized it actually was not for me. I did not like having movies out there that had my name on them and that were did not represent what I had written. And I did have a number of feature films made that were like the super low budget stuff you see on sci-fi at 3 in the morning kind of things. And in the 90s was when I finally kind of wised up and said I need to segue over to prose. And I started writing fiction at that point, and then I got really into nonfiction a little bit later. As of this point, I've written 4 novels and over 200 short stories and quite a
Wow.
few different nonfiction books. 3 on the history of Halloween, and then things on the history of ghosts and seances. And my last big nonfiction book was out last year, and it was my first big coffee table art book, which was really fun to do. It was called The Art of the Zombie Movie.
Wow. So cool. You know, we're going to get into some of the so how to get a hold of your work towards the end of this podcast. So people stick around with us because you're going to find out all these cool the places you can go to get all these cool works that Lisa's done. It sounds amazing. It's in the area of cool and spooky, but I love the zombie most recent one. That's kind of cool. So yeah, people are going to want to check it out. And that's the other thing too. Everybody who's listening, we're going to be talking about Halloween, but her book is the one that we're referring to here is Trick or Treat, A History of Halloween. So you want to dive more into what we're going to talk about today? Get that book and really jump in and just get all the information that's available. We're going to skim some things here today, but that's about it, just to whet your appetite. Well, I just want to say that I have a bunch of questions here that we'll go through, and then let's just go about and see where it goes. We'll cover all kinds of things. So I do want to start off with this question, and that is, you sort of went there, but what inspired you to write that book, Trick or Treat, A History of Halloween?
After I did the encyclopedia, I had so much material amassed that I actually rolled it over into another book right away called A Halloween Anthology. And that was a collection of the original source materials, some of which I just loved that I had found for the encyclopedia. And then a few years after that, this wonderful publisher called Reaction Books approached me and said, "Hey, we're doing a series of books on different holidays, and we wondered if you might be interested in doing a Halloween volume." And it was funny because I loved Reaction's books anyways. And when I got that email, I actually thought at first it was a hoax because it was like, "Whoa, wait, I love their books. Who's punking me here?" Before I realized it was real. And so I was very excited about that because I had wanted, in fact, to do something that was not like an encyclopedic reference, where you're kind of, just stating facts. And with an actual history, you get to look for those connections and find the through lines and make some interesting conclusions. And so that was really fun to write Trick or Treat.
Yeah, no, that's great. And people are, so many people are loving this holiday, right? And it seems, like I said, more and more each year. I can't remember what the numbers have been recently for purchases and just the commerce around Halloween. And it's high. The numbers are high. So people are really into it. And I think that, yeah, I mean, for people to be able to get a feel for where this came from, not just today, what they see, but, all these things that created what we experience today. Love that kind of history, that kind of information.
Yeah, there's a little bit of debate about that, but we can have fun answering that too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that in your book, you call Halloween a misunderstood festival. Tell us what you meant by that.
I think it is the most misunderstood holiday. And I mean, you can just start with the name. With, New Year's Eve, we all know what that means, Father's Day. I think most of us by now know how Christmas breaks down as a word, but Halloween, I very few people I think nowadays know what that name means. And even when you break it down and explain what the different parts of the word mean, it's a little mysterious. It actually breaks down to the evening before All Saints' Day. Hollow was an old word for saints. Ean, the evening, it's a Ean, E-E-N is an abbreviated form of evening. And all Saints' Day is celebrated on November 1st, and it was originally instituted probably to co opt a very popular festival called Samhain. Samhain was a Celtic holiday. It was one of their biggest holidays of the year. It was their New Year's festival. The name actually means summer's end. By the way, it is spelled Samhains. It's commonly mispronounced Samhain. There are a million horror movies with
Mm,
characters named Samhain because of that, but it is, most people I think by now know it's pronounced Samhain. And it was a somewhat macabre festival. It was a time when the Celts, and we are, by the way, talking specifically about the Irish Celts. We don't know a lot about many of the Celtic tribes. But with the Irish Celts, there were missionaries who came to Ireland and recorded a lot of the Celtic lore. And that's some of the best history we have now on the Celts. And those histories record a time of year when it was getting colder, the days were growing shorter, and the Celts celebrated Samhain by telling ghost stories. There are many really spooky stories. They thought it was a night when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, and
mm,
there were things they believed in called the Sidhe, which were like these evil fairies, and they could cross over on Samhain night and wreak all kinds of terrible havoc. They were really, really frightening. So when the Catholic missionaries were trying to convert these Celts, they had an existing doctrine that was really smart. They had already figured out that rather than just trying to stamp out these existing celebrations, they were much more successful with their conversions if they co-opted them. So
mm.
they set up the date of their saint celebration on November 1st. It was not always that. It kind of originally had been in mid-May. They moved it to November 1st because the Celts reckoned their calendar by the sunset, not by midnight. So the day actually started on October 31st at sunset. And
Wow.
so that's where we get the Hallows Evening part of it. And there is the debate I mentioned earlier is that there are some scholars out there who actually think that Halloween is strictly Catholic in origin, that it does not owe anything to Samhain. My question to them is always, where does it get that macabre side then? Because
Yeah.
there is really nothing spooky about a bunch of saints. Yes, a few of them were a little strange. I mean, there was the one guy who kept preaching after his head was cut off, but overall, it is just not a particularly spooky holiday. So it seems pretty obvious to me that it gets that from Samhain. And it took a long time for that co-opting to succeed. It really wasn't until we get to around maybe 1500 that we start to see a little bit of what looks like a contemporary Halloween. It was probably still called either Hallowmass or All Hallows Eve at that point, but people were celebrating it with parties. The parties might involve something like bobbing for apples or maybe dressing up in fancy finery or costumes. And from then on, it just progresses to what we have today.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's funny. This was the exact area that I had my first two questions. So this is great. I really love this. Now I'm going to add a little to it. So the Snap Apple Night and November Eve chapter, it sounds like it kind of fits into this too. So maybe let's talk about that chapter and what you have in there as we're, to tie into this here.
Yeah, the holiday acquired many different names throughout Great Britain, and by the way, from I think it's 16 I forget the exact date, 1630 actually, something like that. It was banned in England because they did not want to condone any Catholic celebrations at that point. They had
Mm,
separated from the church and the Pope, and they were still, however, celebrating Halloween in Scotland and Ireland. And later on, it would come back into Britain, but that took many centuries. And so it had acquired all kinds of fun, different names all over. November Eve was one. You mentioned Snap Apple Night. Snap Apple was a version of bobbing for apples, which sounds absolutely terrifying and very dangerous to me. With Snap Apple, you were not trying to get an apple that was floating in a tub of water. You were trying to bite an apple that was hanging from a string and swinging. I'm sure this must have knocked out many teeth, and
yeah,
it's probably a really good reason that we do not play this game anymore.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. I'm just envisioning that as we're talking about it. Before we get too far, a thought that I had, or I was wondering what the Bram Stoker Award was because that's something I saw on your bio too, and I'm like, what a cool sounding award. What is that?
It's kind of the easiest way to explain it might be to say that it's the Oscars of the horror writing world. It is given by the Horror Writers Association, which is a global organization of people who write the stuff that I do. And they have been giving these awards since I think 1987. And they give it in 14 categories now, I think it is. There are things like novel and first novel and short story and screenplay and poetry even. And yes, I am incredibly fortunate and very honored to have won the Bram Stoker Award 6 times. I've won it a couple of times for nonfiction. I won for first novel, and I've won for short story, and then for long fiction, which is like a novella.
Hmm, that's cool. I mean, it's cool already, and the name is just the best. I love it. Yeah. Well, let me ask you, Halloween traditions. Let's talk a little bit about what people might see in different places. I mean, we know Halloween is big right here in the United States, and then I often think of like the Day of the Dead. In Mexico they have that sort of thing, which I don't know. I feel like they get converged or something, but I don't think they're the same thing. Maybe talk about that. But I'm curious about just Halloween around the world. Is this just a USA thing, or is it happening other places too?
Yeah, what's funny is in the roughly 10-year gap between when I did the encyclopedia and when I did Trick or Treat: A History of Halloween, Halloween had exploded around the world. It was astonishing. When I did the encyclopedia, which came out, the first edition was, I think, what, 2002 or 3, something like that. It was pretty much just American. There were
Mm,
some minor celebrations of it in Great Britain and a few other parts of the world, but it was not huge. By the time I got to Trick or Treat, it was almost everywhere. It was in Russia, even though it is technically banned there. It is celebrated especially in clubs and so forth. It's in mainland China. Certainly it's been in Hong Kong and Japan for a while. It's in South Africa. Now it is still not incredibly huge in much of the southern hemisphere just because I think of the seasonal associations are very different,
yes.
but it has certainly caught on in Australia. It's just amazing to watch how it has been exported all over the world by now. And it's funny that people never think about the reasons for that. There are two things that have made Halloween popular all over the world. One is syndicated television programs. The whole world loves our sitcoms. The Simpsons, Roseanne, these things are huge all over the
Love them.
world. And
Yeah.
so you can imagine being a family somewhere who is watching this American show, and there is this adorable looking thing where the kids are in costumes and have little bright orange pumpkin pails and they're getting candy and you just think, well, that looks really fun. And the other thing that has popularized it is fast food. McDonald's is all over the world. McDonald's does the Halloween Happy Meals. Again, the kids are
Mm-hmm.
getting the little pails, they're going to put them to use. Everybody loves to see a cute kid in a costume. And so those two things have really cemented its popularity, I think, around the world. And now, in terms of Dia de los Muertos in Mexico, that is actually a separate and distinct holiday, even though it is celebrated almost at the same time. But I like to think of Dia de los Muertos as what happens when you have the Catholic influence, but not the Celt. The Celtic influence is not there. Instead, you get the indigenous peoples of Mexico, the Aztecs, the Mayans. And so these Catholic missionaries are coming in and converting these people, but we end up with a very different holiday. It is technically in most places celebrated on November 2nd, which in the Catholic calendar is All Souls Day. And that's where the name Dia de los Muertos comes from, Day of the Dead, All
Mm.
Souls. And it's much more somber. It's all about remembering your loved ones who have passed. You are inviting them back to your home for a day. And in some areas, by the way, it is a much longer than a 1 day celebration. It can be 3 days, it can even be 30. There may be, in certain regions, there's a day set aside just for the souls of children who are coming back. And you are offering your loved ones whatever their favorite things were in life. If they loved a particular brand of cigar, you put that out for them. If they loved a food, that goes out for them. And so it's really a very lovely and beautiful day. You may also be going to the cemetery, cleaning and decorating their graves.
Mm,
And these were all kind of things that were a little bit celebrated by the Catholics on All Saints and All Souls Day, anyways. But with the Aztec and Mayan influence, we get that interest in skulls. We get the mocking death with the playful images of the skeletons and the skulls. La Calavera, La Catriona, who is the woman skull with the big flowery hat and is very famous. And so that's the very distinctive, I think, indigenous element that is in Dia de los Muertos.
that's so cool. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, and yeah, you see when you go to a store and you see the Halloween decorations coming out, they are including a lot of that for the day, the Day of the Dead as well. And I think it's cool. It's a really neat thing, and yeah, pretty interesting. I'm wondering, Lisa, trick or treating. Like, I remember seeing some pictures of kids and their costumes in the 50s or 60s. I'm not sure. But help us understand when that started here in the United States. And is trick or treating prior to the most recent popularity? Is that happening other places in the world too? Or is that mostly just USA?
I This is one of those misconceptions we were talking about at the beginning. I hear all the time that trick or treat goes back thousands of years. I've even heard, oh, the Druids practiced it, and or that it is a direct descendant of a practice called souling. And no, unfortunately, none of those are true. They're very romantic notions. I
Yeah.
wish they were true, but they're not. The fact is that trick or treat is very recent. It's completely American in origin. It's less than 100 years old, although at this point it's borderline because it probably started right around 1930. There are some mentions as early as the mid 20s that start to sound a little bit like trick or treat, but they may be missing some element. The kids may not be in costume, the kids may not be saying trick or treat. What it was a reaction to destructive prank playing,
Hmm.
because by the time we got into the 1920s in America, Halloween had kind of been taken over by juvenile boys. And the boys loved to play pranks. This was something that came from the Irish. The Irish had been big prank players on Halloween. And with the Irish, the idea was that they were kind of pretending to be the mischievous fairies and to play pranks and say, oh, the fairies did that, this sort of thing. But with the boys, of course, it was just prank playing. And at first it was fun. They might go to the farmer's house, and one of their favorite activities was to disassemble a fence. And then they would take the gate and they would put it in some place weird like the roof of the barn. And this was so popular that there were places where Halloween was called Gate Night in the US. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, as Halloween became bigger and more popular, and as it moved into the cities, this playful prank playing became destructive vandalism. And
Yes.
by the time we get into the Great Depression, which, is essentially the very early 1930s, it's costing cities millions of dollars because now the kids are breaking glass lighting fixtures and windows and setting fires and even doing things like tripping people on the sidewalks. So a lot of cities thought about trying to ban Halloween at that point, but a few of them were smarter and said maybe we can buy these kids off, and they got together in community groups and they started creating these sort of early proto versions of trick or treats. Some places called them originally house to house parties.
Hmm.
because the idea was that a bunch of houses in a neighborhood got together, and the first house might give the kids the costume, the next house might give them a game, the next house might give them a little tiny miniature haunted attraction in the basement, the next house would give them a treat. And this caught on, the prank playing plummeted, and so it started to become very popular all over the country. It has now, of course, the pranking aspect of it is now largely forgotten. I suspect that most kids who say trick or treat have absolutely no idea why they are saying that.
Right.
It has just become a fun ritual, and it has, along with the rest of Halloween, been exported all over the world. Like I mentioned earlier, people love seeing their kids dressed up and carrying the playful pumpkins. And I think maybe Japan was one of the first countries to really adopt trick or treat because they have such a history of loving costuming there. And they would have huge parades in the major cities of Japan where the kids were all parading along in their costumes and collecting their treats.
It's interesting. I've heard about Japan, I think, and maybe my mind is not right here, but I felt like I heard that they really love Christmas, not so much for the same reasons that we celebrate it, but because they say, oh, that looks like a lot of fun. What they're doing over there in the United States. Let's do it here. So, yeah, I think they like the party, right? They like to get involved. We were talking about some of the pranks and stuff like that. It's very funny to me growing up on the East Coast. That's where I'm from. We had something called Mischief Night, and that was the night before Halloween. And I've come to find that that's not the case all over the country. I didn't know that. When I first moved to Utah, I said, people, watch out, make sure you lock your car. And they would look at me and go, for what? And I'd say, Mischief Night. And they'd say, what is that? But back in, the Philadelphia, Penn Jersey region, it, yeah, it got pretty destructive in some neighborhoods, fires and all sorts of things. Some of my friends and I shouldn't admit this, but it was not terrible, but we would pick up as teenagers small cars and move them. Like a bunch of us would just pick up the car and just move it to the side of the house or somewhere, right? Never too far, but when the people came out the next day, they'd be like, where's my car? And that was our thing. So it's interesting how people have done that, right?
That's an impressive prank, I have to say. Yeah, it's that is definitely very regionalized. I don't think we ever had much of that here in California, but I've heard many names for it from all the other parts of the country. Mischief Night in Detroit, people know it as Devil's Night, and it was a very
Mm,
dangerous night for decades. They finally did get that under control. Goosey Night is an odd one that I've heard. There was even, I think, Cabbage Night because kids were throwing cabbages and so forth. So yeah, it's a definitely a very regionalized thing that is not everywhere. But yeah, I think it was a way for kids to have their cake and eat it too. So they got to
yes.
play the pranks on the night before and then go out and trick or treat and collect the candy on Halloween.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I'm wondering, and we're touching on it right here and there, but one of my next questions is the evolution of Halloween through the years here in the United States. Young people now look at this and they're like, this is cool. This is so much fun. And us, as some of the older people, we look at back in the 70s and we say, well, that was really cool, but a very different experience. And that's what I bring with me, those thoughts of what I did in those years. But what was the evolution like? I mean, I heard somewhere that in the very beginning, maybe it was New York or something, that kids that were not well to do would bring around a sock or something and they would do something. They were called the Ash Kids or something. I'm not sure if that's true, but I remember hearing something like that. Curious about the evolution of this holiday.
That's interesting. I actually have heard of something like that related to Thanksgiving more than
Oh,
Halloween. But it did indeed come over mainly in the 1840s when there was terrible famine in the British Isles and people were fleeing, especially the Scottish and Irish were coming to America in droves. And, obviously they brought their favorite customs with them. And it's interesting that about the same time, there's something else happening in culture, which is the improvements in printing presses. And it's weird to think of that having a huge impact on a holiday, but it did because it suddenly made magazines very popular and affordable. And magazines became hugely popular in the middle of the 19th century, and every American mother and housewife was reading these magazines. And a lot of the magazines were telling stories of quaint traditions that immigrants had brought with them. And Halloween popped up in a few of these. And it sounded so charming that these housewives started holding these parties. And also, some of these housewives back then, it was a time when anyone who was even middle class might have a live in servant. That was very common. And these servants were often the people who would come over in those famine migrations, the Scottish and the Irish, and they would bring that tradition with them. And people just loved the playful. At this point, there was not a lot of costuming, but it was a thing celebrated mainly by children. They would have a party, they would make candy. At that time, people would make taffy in their homes. You had to pull this candy, and the kids loved it. And they would maybe carve a jack o' lantern, and then they would tell spooky stories at the end of the night. And that kind of was the way Halloween was celebrated through the end of the 19th century. And then it starts to become a little bit more of an adult holiday. Now adults are starting to party as well. And you also get retailing now comes into it. In the beginning of the 20th century, the big companies, decoration and party companies appeared. Denizens was a big one. And these companies started putting out a lot of Halloween party items. These Some of these things kind of defined the holiday. In fact, before the retailing came in, people were carving jack-o'-lanterns into things as besides pumpkins. I actually have an 1897 party guide that suggests carving them in things like cucumbers and apples, and no, I don't know how they did that. But
Wow.
it's not until you kind of get these companies going, oh, wait, these big orange fruits that are native to the New World look great on our decorations. We get the colors defined then. Black and orange start to really be solidified as Halloween's theme colors. We get more of the costuming starting to come in. And so by the time you get to about 1920, when that prank playing is really taking off, there are adults who are starting to celebrate as well. But then Trick or Treat comes along. Trick or Treat kind of goes on pause a little bit during World War II because of things like shortages in sugar and so forth. But it comes back strong. By the time you get into the 1950s, television is a thing. Television episodes are showing Trick or Treat and Halloween. Disney puts out a great cartoon in 1954 about Donald Duck and his nephews trick or treating, and trick or treating is huge. And that goes on for a while until we start to get to some things happening in popular culture that make trick or treating not so appealing. There is a rumor of a woman giving out poisoned candy, which is based somewhat in fact. In 1963, this Long Island housewife who did not like older children's trick or treating gave them little buttons of ant poison.
Oh boy.
That ended up becoming this, of course, crazy legend of razor blades and apples and so forth. And then in the 70s, we get a couple of scares with things like poisoned Tylenol. People now become so obsessed with their kids' candy getting tampered with that it knocks back trick or treat a little bit. But at the same time, Halloween is morphing more into an adult holiday. For me, what finally kind of completes its transformation into an adult holiday is the 1978 release of John Carpenter's Halloween, which suddenly tells us that this is not just a fun, playful holiday for kids. This thing is terrifying, and it creates the image of the slasher, which of course becomes an integral part of Halloween. And about that same time, we get these amusement parks here in Southern California looking for some way to create profit during their slow fall season. And Knott's is the first one to say, what about Halloween? So they try it. It's very successful. By the 80s, they're all doing it. It becomes huge and it inaugurates the whole haunted attractions industry, which ends up becoming huge for homeowners too. So that kind of brings us, I think, to where we are now, which is that it is kind of split between a day for adults and a day for kids. On the one hand, the kids are still trick or treating, although it is much more of a regionalized and controlled thing. Your parents go with you now, that sort of thing. But we also now have the haunted attractions industry catering to adults, and even the horror movie industry kind of catering to adults and timing some of their big releases with the holiday.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, as you're talking through that, it's just going through my mind. I'm just going, whoa, it's so cool. Yeah. So commercialization, good, right? Would you say good for the holiday? Seems like it. It feels like it is. What do you think?
I mean, I enjoy it. I know some purists who don't like it, and here in Southern California, some of them actually turned more to Dia de los Muertos for a while because that felt less overly commercialized. Although, as you noted, I am seeing it showing up more in retailing now. And by the way, that was something I predicted 20 years ago when I was doing interviews and asked what I saw for the future of Halloween 20 years ago. I always said it's going to start to merge with Dia de los Muertos.
Wow.
Um, and that is, I think, something that we are seeing a little bit more of every year. But yeah, the retailing of it I enjoy, and it's interesting to see how retailing is now expanding Halloween across the calendar, not just the
Yeah.
globe, but the calendar. Just today, in fact, I went out to a Walmart to check something because I have heard that Walmart has leaned into the idea of Summerween this year, and I was curious to see what they were doing to retail that. Unfortunately, my Walmart did not have any Summerween stuff,
Yeah.
despite pictures I've seen friends sharing on Facebook of Walmart Summerween displays, which look very cute. But yeah, we now have Summerween. It kind of started with Halfoween, which of course
Yeah.
was the end of April when it's 6 months to Halloween, and it seems like it just kind of keeps spreading down
Yeah.
further and further on the calendar.
Well, it's so funny that you bring that up. So, my one daughter-in-law, about a month or so back, says, "Hey," because they just built a house, and they said, "Let's. I want to have a little get together, and it's going to be a something Summerween or something." And I went, "Whoa!" She says, "Yeah, everybody come with something on. The kids can come dressed up, and then all the foods and desserts were Halloween themed." And so we did that in the middle of June, and I was like, right on. It was a lot of fun, but new, right? Like it was a new thing for me anyway, but I liked it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, just the Summerween thing really just started a couple of years ago. And I think both Summerween and Halfoween, the names, came out of like Disney children's shows. I think
mm,
that was the first place that those names appeared. And now they have really caught on. And yeah, the Summerween stuff is adorable. It's the photos I saw of what Walmart was selling were jack-o'-lanterns, little lanterns that are actually like watermelon colored, and a lot of pink and green in the Summerween retailing.
yeah, it's crazy. And Hobby Lobby seems to have it all year round. Or some, at least one aisle, they have Halloween or fall stuff
Oh
all
yeah.
year round. It's pretty interesting. You know, around here, wondering if you're seeing it there as well in California. I'm seeing this slight change. So I'm seeing regular trunk or treats that happen often in church parking lots, right? Like
Hmm.
the neighborhood and of their local congregation. There'll be trunk or treats there, which deals with the kids getting something safe, right? Like, because everybody either knows each other or whatever. And it gives the little ones a chance to run to 5 or 6 cars before they get tired, right? Because they run out of energy fast. And then you see adults having a little more parties. So they kind of split it up, like you were saying. And then we have this really neat place here called Gardner Village. And the whole village is probably like 40 or 50 shops, all set up in a small community like Old Town setting. And for Halloween, they put witches and pumpkins and they light it up all over. And every weekend in October, they have what's called Witches Night Out. and it goes crazy. So all these women come dressed up as witches, and there's parades and stuff. It really has gotten big. It's pretty fun to see. Yeah. Anyway, trunk or treats. Are you seeing those kinds of things there in California?
A little bit, although less trunk or treat and more things like Boo at the Zoo has been big here for a while, and I there are similar celebrations I know at zoos all over the country.
Yeah.
Some of the malls are doing that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm not sure. I don't see a lot of the either trunk or treat or the I know some churches will call it a harvest festival.
Hmm.
That is less what I'm seeing here, but there is definitely those other celebrations, the malls, the zoos, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's just neat to see it. And like I was saying here, it's kind of a recent thing. So it's the evolution, seeing it, and I'm just watching it. Maybe at the end of this episode, I'll ask for your next prediction for the next 20 years to see where we go. You have a chapter in the book, Burns to Burton, Halloween and Popular Culture. What sorts of things do you explore in that chapter?
Well, we already talked about a big one, of course, being John Carpenter's Halloween. This is the chapter where I kind of look at Halloween in books, in movies, in television, in music. And I think the two key films at this point certainly are Carpenter's Halloween and The Nightmare Before Christmas, which gave Halloween a huge merchandising and collectibles boost. I think that might be a film that came right about the time that people were starting to collect the holiday at the end of the 90s. And now, of course, it's extremely collectible. The vintage materials bring thousands of dollars sometimes in auction. And I think Nightmare Before Christmas really spurred that collectibles market on. But
Yeah.
I also love other things. Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat, the movie from a couple of years ago that had the little character of Sam Hain. Hocus Pocus is an interesting one because that was not a major Halloween film until a few years ago. And it seems like maybe Spirit Halloween stores licensed that and really promoted it and made it much bigger. I'm not sure why it
Yeah.
suddenly took off. And of course, in television, I grew up loving. There was actually, people forget there's a Halloween episode of the original Star Trek, which still is amazing. But I always loved like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episodes. And of course, even back before that, it's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And the interesting cultural impact that was really even though it was an animated special on television first, and I think it comes out in what, 67, 68, it created the market for children's Halloween books, which were not very popular before that. There were just a few isolated ones here and there, but now, of course, it's humongous. I collect, of course, things on Halloween, and I always have friends who are trying to say to me, "Oh, why don't you collect the children's books?" And I say, because that is a bottomless pit at this
Yeah.
point. I mean, it is so popular. There is just no way to collect all of the children's Halloween books. And then, of course, even into things like tattooing. Halloween tattoos are huge. And it's just
Wow.
been so interesting to watch the way it has infiltrated almost every part of popular culture now.
Yeah, it is amazing. It is there's a lot of energy around it for sure. It's fun. What is there any fairs, festivals, events, expos that you're aware of that really do a good job that people can look for? It'd probably be regionalized, but is there anything like that that you're aware of where you go, this is a really nice addition to the
Yes.
Halloween month?
Yeah, there's one coming up here in Southern California in just about a month, a little over a month actually, in August. There's a show called Midsummer Scream, which has been around for maybe 12, 15 years, something like that. It now draws over 50,000 people. It is dedicated to Halloween and horror culture. It is so fun. It's practically Comic-Con sized, but what's special about it is they give half of their gigantic vendor floor to haunts. So
Oh wow.
you can go to one side and spend all day just shopping, and then if you go to this other side, you get to walk through little mini haunts and just see what people are doing with their haunts and so forth. And it's so fun. And then, of course, they also have panels and speakers and celebrity signing, that kind of thing. And then for the more industrial side of it, there's a show every year that happens in the spring called Trans World. And I actually have never been to Trans World. I keep meaning to go. I just haven't been, but it is a show that is actually targeted towards professional haunters. And it is a very large trade show where you walk that floor and you are getting to see what the latest trends in animatronic figures are, or how to create better fog at your haunt, that kind of thing. It's definitely really like high level industrial stuff.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah, there's people doing a good job with their home haunts for sure. We've got somebody in St. George, Utah, who he's set up a pirate ship in front of his house, and when you go through it, there's a whole thing that you walk through. You feel like you're at Pirates of the Caribbean and Disney. It's so well done, so well done. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Lisa. Is there anything else about Halloween or your book that you think, hey, let's just talk about this, or let me share a little bit about that? Because I know there's a lot in there, and Halloween is just a topic you can talk about forever. But is there anything that you think would be worth chatting about at this point?
I mean, there's always more things to talk about
Yeah.
with Halloween, but I am looking right now at my wall behind my computer here at some of the postage stamps that have come out on it. I mean, that's been really fun to see. It wasn't until very recently that US Postal did official Halloween stamps, and I'm really proud to say that I was the consultant on those. They've done two runs now. They did jack-o'-lanterns and then they did spooky silhouettes. That's kind of an interesting step that no one expected, I think, but
Yeah.
it's just so fun to watch it continue to expand and evolve. And I'm going to steal your question. I know you were going to ask about what I'm predicting for the future
Yeah.
of Halloween. And one of the things that I foresee is how it is going to move into all of these different parts of the world, but combine with their local cultural celebrations. And one of the things that I like to point to is in Hong Kong, there's a very popular amusement park that's been around forever there called, I think it's Ocean Pacific Park. And they've been doing Halloween mazes like ours for a long, long time. But they have started to do things like they had a maze a few years ago where you walked through the Buddhist hells,
Oh
which,
wow.
is something that I thought was amazing. It's something that you would not see probably in an American haunt, but I suspect we will see more of that kind of thing all over the world. I know that there are haunted attractions popping up more and more around the world, and I suspect many of them will start to represent more localized urban legends and folklore, that kind of thing.
Wow. I love that because that just makes it more fun for the folks to come and check all that out because it's not cookie cutter. It's going to be all kinds of unique spins on this. Love that. Great prediction. Waiting for it. That's great. Well, Lisa, this has been great. I've loved our discussion and to talk about these things. Can you tell the listeners what are all the books that fall into this genre of Halloweenish that you've done, and how can they look at those, find those, purchase those books if they want some?
Well, the Trick or Treat is the one that I always recommend to people because the other two are kind of academic references. The Halloween Encyclopedia is very large and thorough, but it's the kind of thing that does best, I think, in a library. Trick or Treat is a fun book. It's got photographs and illustrations throughout. It's very reasonably priced. You can get it anywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, whatever. So that's probably the one to go for. Although if you also like fiction about Halloween, I have a fiction collection called The Shamanok and Other Halloween Treats. That's a
Hmm.
collection of I think a dozen short stories and then four longer novellas. So if you want to maybe get into the spirit at any time of the year, that might be a fun collection to read.
Yeah, that's great. I got one daughter that likes to take her kids and start in the end of August and start doing things like that, stories and stuff, getting them ready as they get into the later months, into October. So great suggestion. That is awesome. Well, what other projects do you have? You have anything on deck? Anything you're working on? Anything in the future that you're thinking about doing that people can keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I have another nonfiction book that by the time this airs, I hope I will be a long way into it because I'm just, as we're recording this, my agent is just finishing up the contract negotiations. But I have done a number of books, as I mentioned, about the history of ghosts, seances. This is going to be a history of demonic possession nonfiction book. It'll be very large and it'll be, I hope, really fun and detailed and a great read. And then I always have a lot of shorter pieces coming out, short stories, essays, that kind of thing. And I suggest people visit my Substack, lisamorton.substack.com. I do a monthly newsletter that I try to pack with all kinds of stuff. And I also have a little subset of that, which is for paid subscribers, where I talk a lot about more detailed things in the history of ghosts and Halloween and so forth.
Love it. This is great. It's been amazing. I love this. I'm in the mood. I'm in the mood for Halloween. Lisa, thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing the history of trick-or-treating and Halloween and just helping us see all that, right? People enjoy the holiday, but, what's all the things that make that holiday what it is today? I love that. So as we wrap up here today, anything else you wanted to say to the listeners, or anything you want to say about your work, the Halloween, anything before we wrap up?
I will just say happy Halloween to everyone and keep the spirit going. And if anyone has questions, I'm always available to contact via my website, lisamorton.com.
Awesome. Lisa, once again, thank you so much for being with us and to share all of this. It's an exciting time. And for everybody out there, happy Halloween to you as well. And thank you once again for watching and listening. And if you've enjoyed this kind of variety and this kind of content, do us a favor. Please subscribe to the podcast and hit the like button. Tell somebody else about it. And remember, there's a lot of strange and unexpected in our reality, so always keep your eyes, ears, and minds open. And until next time, stay safe.
Thank you for listening to High Strangeness. This was a glance at some of the strange that exists in our reality.